The PMBOK Guide 7th edition is structured around 8 project management domains and identifies 12 key principles of project management. Today, we will look a little bit closer into the 12 project management principles. So what are project management principles? There are many ways to look at and understand the principles. Principles of project management are essentially guidelines that we can follow to ensure that we successfully carry out a project in our workplace. They provide guidelines for strategy, decision-making, and problem-solving. They form the basis for standards and methodologies. We can also look at them as being laws or rules that govern our behavior, guides to our behavior, as well as infusing us with the right morals and a code of ethics. In the subsequent slides, we will take a closer look at the 12 project management principles. But for now, let's look at them at a very high level and list them out one by one. First, be a diligent, respectful, and caring steward. 2, create a collaborative project team environment. 3, effectively engage the stakeholders. 4, focus on value. 5, recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions. 6, demonstrate leadership behaviors. 7, tailor based on context. 8, build quality into processes and deliverables. 9, navigate complexity. 10, optimize risk responses. 11, embrace adaptability and resilience. And finally, 12, enable change to achieve envisioned future state. Let's take a closer look. First, stewardship. Be a diligent, respectful, and caring steward. Project managers and the project management teams have a duty to act responsibly, both internally and externally to the organization in which the project is undertaken. With respect to internal responsibilities, the expectation is that the project team and the project manager operate in alignment with an organization's objectives, their strategy and vision, and are responsible for sustaining long-term values. In essence, what this means is that each organization, having defined particular strategy and vision, it's important that the project management team, when undertaking projects, keep focus on and make decisions accordingly that support that strategy and that vision. They are expected to engage respectfully with project team members. They are to be diligent with organizational finances, materials, and other resources. There's an expectation that the project management team and project manager will make the right decisions when it comes to safeguarding and being good financial stewards, and to be able to use organizational resources in an effective and efficient manner, and that they should apply authority, accountability, and responsibility appropriately. Be a compassionate leader. Externally, there is an expectation that the project manager and the project team have an awareness of environmental sustainability and the use of the resources. To be diligent in maintaining relationships with external stakeholders. Be responsible when it comes to the impact of the project on the market and the social community itself. To ask themselves, are the decisions that we are making, is the project itself and the way that it is structured and implemented going to be detrimental or supportive within the community in which it operates? And a responsibility for advancing the state of the practice, meaning advancing the state of project management. Another way to look at this is that stewardship includes integrity, care, trustworthiness, and compliance. Integrity is the expectation to behave honestly and ethically, for project managers to hold themselves to a high standard, to serve as a role model. They must be able to demonstrate personal and organizational values, be empathetic, be self reflective, and be open to feedback. In terms of care, the expectation is that they oversee project matters beyond the confines of the defined responsibilities, i.e., care for the environment, and care for sustainable use of natural resources. The expectation is that they understand the potential unwanted consequences of project outcomes and that they create a transparent working environment and strive to create safe teams. Trustworthiness implies that they keep their commitments, that they're honest in their conversations, and that they provide timely and accurate information to stakeholders. And finally, compliance. Project managers are expected to follow established guidelines within the organization and to act in accordance to the rules and regulations within the jurisdiction in which they operate. The second principle revolves around the creation of collaborative project team environment. So its focus is on the team. It's important to recognize that project delivery is quote unquote a team sport. It is impossible for a project to be delivered successfully without the collaboration of many individual team members. Teams that collaborate are more likely to achieve better and more effective and efficient project outcomes. We know through studies that teams that are collaborative in nature work better. Teams within an organization are typically defined by a shared culture and defined norms. Often, teams may create their own shared subculture. And why is this important? It's important because these elements of culture and norms provide guidelines as to how the project team collaborates, the expectations and the responsibilities of each individual team member. It provides policies and procedures around communication, around how information is shared and stored. And there's so many other elements that are absolutely critical to establishing a successful team. Collaborative teams have characteristics that facilitate open dialogue. Team members have respect for each other, and the team members feel safe in expressing their ideas and opinions. As you work within your teams this semester, it's important to consider some factors that contribute to the development of a collaborative team. First and foremost, as we saw in the previous week, team agreements or norms have a significant influence and effect on the collaborative nature of a particular team. Team agreements or working norms and behaviors are necessary to ensure successful collaboration. These norms can provide guidelines as to how the project management team collaborates, the expectations on the individual team members, how information is shared and stored, how often the teams meet and exchange information, the roles and responsibilities, and other things that are important in establishing a well structured, cohesive, and safe team. We'll also see that the organizational structure itself has an influence on the collaborative nature of a team. The structures that are imposed by the organization help to coordinate the individual efforts within the project team. A project team may have its own organizational structure that indicates who reports into whom, who has certain roles and responsibilities, what those may be, what authority, the lines of communication, and so forth. There can also be the standing committees, for example, an audit committee, finance committee, a program champions committee, many different committees that exist to provide guidance as well as a place for decision making. And then we also have standing meetings. And finally, processes. We will see in later parts of the course, processes and well-defined processes at that have a significant influence on an individual's ability to perform and their level of motivation. Studies have shown where there are strong and well-defined processes, the individuals are better able to work effectively and are more motivated because they understand what is expected of them, but they also understand how to go about completing certain tasks. So processes enable the completion of tasks and they give direction. They define inputs, i.e., what sort of documentation or information is required and what is expected in terms of how that information and those inputs are transformed into expected outputs, i.e., deliverables. We've seen through our discussion last week that there are 5 process groups or 10 knowledge areas, but underneath them, there are 49 processes. And those 49 processes give guidance to things like how we develop a project charter and what the project charter contains, how schedules are developed, tracked, and managed, costs, risks, and so forth. Well-defined roles and responsibilities are absolutely critical to project success. They improve culture. They help us understand who makes relevant decisions and within which given context, i.e., the authority of each individual. They also provide guidelines and accountability, who is answerable for an outcome. And they define responsibility, who is obliged to do something. Collaborative project teams take collective ownership of the project outcomes. Something else to consider and to be mindful of. And those are the concepts of diversity, standards, and what we deem shared information. Diversity is critical in project management success and the establishment of effective project teams. Diversity ensures project teams see and act differently. Projects, as I've mentioned often in class, are a response to a particular project problem. And these problems, as problems usually have, are many different approaches to their solution. There's some level of creativity and certain ways of seeing the problem that enable us to effectively define it and come up with a solution. So diversity within the project teams ensures that we have different perspectives on the problem itself and the solutions that are available to us. And we're able to leverage the differences within the project team and across the project team members to increase productivity. It's also important to note that collaborative environments allow for the free exchange of information and knowledge. What that means is that it is imperative that people are afforded the latitude and the privilege to be able to speak, to share their ideas without fear of being put down or their ideas dismissed. Collaborative teams enables individual project team members to contribute their best efforts. When someone feels safe, when someone feels that their voice can be heard, not necessarily always taken and incorporated into a particular course of action, but that they have the ability to share their opinions freely. This allows everyone to feel comfortable and to bring forward their best self. Principle number 3, to effectively engage with stakeholders. So let's define stakeholders. A stakeholder is an individual, a group, or an organization that may be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a project decision, project activity, or the project outcome itself. So let's look at this a little bit more closely. For example, your project is implementing a new appointment booking system, and as a result is also changing, i.e. transforming the current processes in which appointments are booked, managed, communicated across the various teams and the end users within the organization. So obviously stakeholders in this situation are, and this is just one or two, but the stakeholders that are affected by this particular project outcome are the end users. So those groups or individuals that are responsible for making the appointments in either the current system or the new system. So they are affected by this particular project. The stakeholder can also be somebody that affects how the project is being managed, or the communication that is part of the project itself. And the one that really sticks out for me is those individuals that perceive themselves to be affected. So there may be individuals or groups within an organization that are not necessarily stakeholders, i.e. they're not affected by the end outcome, or they're not going to affect decisions within the project or project activities. They're not the project team members. They're not even sort of ancillary teams that in some way, shape, or form have to be brought into the project. But if they perceive themselves, i.e., if they think that they are affected or they believe that they can affect the project outcome, then we have to treat them as stakeholders until we prove or demonstrate otherwise, because we cannot simply ignore them because we believe, even if it's confidently, that they are not affected by or will affect the project. Stakeholders can directly or indirectly influence a project, its outcome, its performance. And this could be in a positive or a negative way. So this is why it's really important for us to understand each of these individuals or groups or organizations that are connected to this project vis-a-vis their ability to influence it or to be influenced by the outcome. And keep in mind that a stakeholder is not always something that we can tag as positive. Stakeholders do not necessarily always support the project and its outcomes, and yet they still are, because of the definition, the effect or are affected by the project itself. And so even negative stakeholders have to be identified and managed effectively. The project manager and the project team have a duty to engage with stakeholders in a proactive fashion and to the degree that is necessary to achieve successful outcomes and satisfied customers. Stakeholder engagement includes communication, i.e., how do we communicate with our stakeholders, when and how often. It's also important as part of stakeholder engagement that we build and maintain relationships with the stakeholders. Again, those that have high or low influence, or that have a positive and or negative view of the project itself. Here, interpersonal skills are essential when it comes to managing and engaging with stakeholders. We have to act with integrity, with honesty. We have to be collaborative and respectful, and also be able to empathize with a given stakeholder, i.e., an individual or a group. Keep in mind, project brings change, and the stakeholders, i.e., those individuals that are affected by that change, they may be feeling uneasy. They may not necessarily agree with the change. There could be some anxiety as to what this change will mean to their particular role. And even if their job is not in jeopardy, it will change. So there may be some misgivings around how they're going to work within a new system. Do they have the required skills? Are they going to be seen as, someone that is no longer with the times and they're not technologically savvy? So we have to be mindful that our engagement considers how things are from their point of view. This is part of emotional intelligence and empathy, which we'll talk about later when we go a little bit more detail on teams and motivation and how to effectively lead and manage and what do we mean by effective leadership. Our ability to engage with stakeholders allows us to understand and collect and evaluate information from each of the stakeholders. And you have to be also reflective and understand that engagement is not a one-time thing or something that happens just early on in the project. It happens throughout the project. Yes, we engage with stakeholders to gather requirements for all intents and purposes, to understand, the functional, the technical, the business requirements. But if you think about change management and change management as a way of, delivering the change so that it sticks, that the change itself, happens, and not just, changing the system, but making sure that people can effectively work within the new paradigm, within the new processes, within the new system, then we're continuously engaging with stakeholders to ensure that they understand the change, that we understand how the roles will change. We understand what new skills they may require and how to train them on the new system and make sure they get the proper training. The fourth project management principle revolves around value, i.e., the need to and the obligation of the project manager and the project team to focus on quote unquote value. So, what do we mean by value? There are many definitions to value, but in general, value is the worth, the importance, or the usefulness of something. Value can be subjective, right? It's in the eye of the beholder. And the same concept can have different values for different stakeholders. When we really talk about value, it's about how effective the new process or the system is, how well it aligns with strategic objectives, that it resolves the problem for which it was undertaken, and other aspects that are critical to project success. So it's not just about delivering the project outcome, but does it meet and exceed the benefits for which it was undertaken? So let's explore the concept of value a little bit further. As we mentioned in class, projects are initiated to address a particular need or problem, or to take advantage of an opportunity, or to circumvent a threat within the organization. So, for example, a project may be undertaken to deliver a new process or modify an existing process that may be inefficient and requires attention. It's not producing the right outcome, or to introduce a new product in response to a competitor, or provide a new service. Projects are and need to be aligned with and support the strategic objectives within the organization. they deliver benefits, or we can term that to be value to the organization. And this is why a focus on value is absolutely critical. Projects are often deemed to be successful if they complete on time, on budget, if they deliver a particular scope. But we have to change that way of thinking. Projects are not successful because the ultimate indicator of success is not on time, on budget, and delivery on scope, but rather whether they deliver the value for which they have been undertaken, that they actually deliver the benefit or the benefits for which they have been undertaken. Did they deliver the intended outcome? If the outcome that is intended is not achieved, regardless of their ability to complete on time and on budget, the project does not and should not be seen as being successful. Value can be both quantifiable or qualifiable. And so project teams should always focus on the value and adjust and adapt throughout the project lifecycle to maximize that expected benefit. A document that is produced before a project gets the green light is called a business case. And many projects are initiated based on that business case. Prior to a project being given the green light, it goes through some sort of evaluation. And the business case lays out what the outcome of that evaluation is and makes a quote unquote case as to why this particular project should be given the time, attention, and resources. Ultimately, it means that it has value that is greater and above any other opportunities the organization has within itself. So, a business case document outlines things like how the project aligns with the strategy of the organization. It addresses potential risks in our ability to successfully deliver. It outlines economic feasibility, something that we will talk about in class a little bit more further when we look at financial considerations like return on investment, payback, net present value. There are key performance measures that are outlined to define what success looks like, how this particular option was evaluated against other evaluations, and alternative approaches that were explored. So, something to think about. In the course of a project, either the outcome itself, the product, the service, the result, or deliverables within the course of the project do not themselves deliver value or necessarily deliver value. We have to be careful not confusing an outcome with a vision or purpose. So think about the following scenario. A new software solution is implemented within the organization. That software is intended to resolve a need for, let's say, higher productivity. But the software itself does not enable productivity, nor does it allow for potentially greater productivity. This can only be achieved by adding additional deliverables like training on how to utilize this new software efficiently and effectively, the coaching that goes along with that training and mentoring, as well as measuring the outcomes of that particular solution. What new KPIs or key performance indicators are available to us? What do we need to measure to ensure that we are achieving the right outcome with this particular new solution? Principle number 5, systems thinking, or recognizing, evaluating, and responding to system interactions. So, a project is a system of interdependent and interacting parts. A project needs to be seen as dynamic, multifaceted system of parts. And each part within the project is affected by or affects other parts. So for example, The project charter is and can be considered a part of the project, but its development can be influenced by the team, their knowledge, the inputs, i.e., the business case, and the outcome. The defined scope of the project, if incomplete, may affect our ability to identify stakeholders correctly and completely. That, in and of itself, i.e., not identifying the stakeholders completely, may lead to missed requirements. Missed requirements affect scope and therefore have an implication on their ability to develop a timeline, i.e., it will be incomplete if work is not completely defined and it's missing. We also talked about in class that projects are affected by the environment in which it's undertaken. Also, a project can be a smaller system within a larger system. So think about a program that may have multiple projects within it. Those individual projects are interconnected as well and interdependent. And a project can have subsystems or releases, phases that are required to integrate effectively in order to deliver the intended outcome. So let's introduce a concept called the butterfly effect. For those of you that might be familiar with the Ashton Kutcher movie, in which he travels back into the past and his actions have ramifications and unintended consequences in the future, this effect is well known and well characterized. It's something that is brought up in weather systems. The whole notion behind it is that if for example, butterfly flaps its wings somewhere in Brazil, that may have an effect on weather, and it could bring about significant weather events some way far enough and far away from that initial occurrence. So think about your projects. When you think about a system that is interconnected, it means that even the smallest of discrepancies or the most minuscule events may lead to significant ramifications, negative, down the line. Something missed early on in a project that may seem innocuous, that is very simple and doesn't seem to be significant in and of itself, all of a sudden, somewhere far enough from its origin, some point down the line, leads to these negative outcomes. So you have to understand of how, and the concept here is that everything is interconnected. And so you can't go into things thinking that elements don't matter. Not when we think about projects as being interdependent and interconnected with other aspects of the business or amongst themselves. So as I alluded, the question might be, and hopefully I addressed it earlier, but the question is, well, what does the butterfly effect have to do with projects? So what you need to think about is that as projects unfold, conditions are continuously changing, and a single change can create several impacts down the road. For example, a single new requirement identified post requirements, and your project might be in the design and build stage of the project or phase, can affect contractual agreements, meaning it is a change of scope, and that may bring about uh, additional costs within the project. It may affect the schedule because a single requirement could actually involve a significant amount of work to address. It may affect the resources, the equipment, and the people working on it because we're introducing net new work. And so our resources may need to be looked at again. And of course, it introduces risks. And risks in of themselves, a new risk could in turn uh, further affect scope, schedule, and costs. And so there's this interconnectivity where that single event of a new requirement propagated itself vastly and could have significant impacts across the project. So the key to success for a project manager and a project team is to try to develop a systems way of thinking. And to do so, there are specific skills that need to be honed and there needs to be focus. One of those skills is empathy, to be able to understand things from the point of view of the affected business areas or the employees that are being affected by the project itself as stakeholders or as end users. We have to develop critical thinking, the ability to see the bigger picture. If we solely focus on the moment and those single instances without consciously thinking about the potential impact of a single decision or a pivot in our project and how that might propagate outward, then we're very sort of focused and very myopic in terms of our thinking. We have to have awareness and confidence to be able to seek advice from others within our project, a self-awareness to be able to challenge our own mental models and biases. And we have to get really good at concepts of modeling and scenario analysis and building. Because to do so, we can begin to understand how one part of a project can affect other parts or the entire ecosystem in which the project is undertaken. So the good news is that if we can develop this concept and this ability of systems thinking to see projects and parts of projects as interconnected, there are significant positive outcomes that lead to success. By developing systems thinking, we will develop early consideration of risk and uncertainty. So we have the ability to identify risk early in the project, put in plans to address it early, and rather than fighting fires, we're proactively managing and eliminating risk. We can adjust our plans throughout the project lifecycle, so there's more flexibility. We can provide clearer and better communication. Our project goals will be aligned with the organizational objectives. We'll have flexibility and the ability to adjust and pivot as necessary. We'll be able to make better decisions because we have more information. We understand the outcomes of particular decisions better. We can identify risk. We can identify threats. And we can better see how the project aligns with or conflicts with any other projects. Because keep in mind, this project that you may be working on is not the only undertaking within the organization. And there are going to be dependencies across projects. And so if you don't think of yourself as this sort of isolated part or a single part within the ecosystem, you gain a better appreciation and you have better working relationships and you make connections with other parts of the business or other projects. And there's consideration and more collaboration so that there is a better chance of success, not only on your own project, but the projects within the organization itself. Principle number 6, leadership. The ability to demonstrate effective leadership behaviors. Leadership is a concept or a discipline that can be explored much more broadly than just a few slides. In fact, I teach a project leadership course that in and of itself is actually greater than our introduction to project management course. And so that should give you a sense of how broad and vast and intricate this particular idea of leadership is. But ultimately, as project managers, you are leaders. And effective leadership promotes project success. There are concepts that, leadership is something that people are born with or they can develop. And there's this, balance between the two. But leadership and the ability to lead successfully, to influence direction, to influence positive outcomes is within everyone. And so we do not and should not see leadership as being fixed. It can be adaptable and it should adapt to the situation as is required. We will talk a little bit more about leadership in the latter parts of our course. But some of the things to be mindful of now is leadership can affect things like motivation and people's willingness to take on other work. It influences somebody's interest. It can influence in terms of how we model our own behaviors and bring about positive behaviors from others. It's about coaching and mentorship. And one of the things that we need to just understand at this point is that leadership means things like integrity, honesty, and ethical behavior. Project managers are expected to lead by example. They need to model and act in a way that is positive and is an indicator of how you want others to model their own behavior and act accordingly. So it's not, do as I do or say as I say, but it is, about acting in accordance to our very own actions or having people model our behavior. So effective leadership is built upon the following traits: vision, to be able to see the bigger picture and to have a singular focus; creativity, the ability to problem solve and to think, quote unquote, outside of the box; to be able to see more than just what is in front of us and come up with optimal solutions. It affects motivation, our own, but also those that we lead. Enthusiasm is contagious. And so good leaders are enthusiastic. They offer encouragement to their team, and they have a significant level of emotional intelligence. And one of those elements of emotional intelligence is empathy. And empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to see things from their point of view. Something that is really important and is often misunderstood is that leadership does not equal authority. So project managers may or may not have authority, formal, and the reach of that or the breadth of that authority may be limited. We will see in some instances, although a project manager leads a team of project team members, he or she may not have formal authority, meaning he or she is not their formal manager. And therefore, things like the carrot and stick approach to motivating and to getting work done is not at their disposal. And so they have to use things like influence and other ways of driving the behavior that they need. The seventh principle: tailoring, or tailor based on content. I've been pretty vocal, and in our definition of projects, I have focused in on this concept of uniqueness. Projects are unique undertakings. Formal definition of a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And the uniqueness can be a result of many things. It's the objectives, the different stakeholders, the environment itself, the structure, the culture, the governance, the oversight that's required. And those are just a few examples. So we cannot see projects as anything other than these unique undertakings. And because projects are unique, it means how we approach the project, our planning, our design and build, or getting the work done phase of the project. It's not something that can be just taken from one project to another, sort of this lift and shift notion. What may work and what led to success on a previous project, a project that had maybe similar outcomes, may not necessarily work in a second instance. And so when we're undertaking projects, we have to be willing to adapt. And tailoring is really about finding the right mix of skills and tools, methods and approaches, and applying the right level of project management to a particular scenario. I spoke in class and said that, a someone that is or works within, construction, or a handy person may have a toolbox with various tools, but what they work on doesn't necessarily require them to use every single tool within that tool set. Every problem is unique, and so they can't go into and make assumptions that the way to resolve a particular scenario or to address a particular customer need at this point, or how to fix, a broken window, or how to address a squeaky floor, or any other kind of unique approach, will require the same thinking, the same set of tools, the same set of skills. And so this concept of we have to tailor, meaning because projects are unique, we have to look at them as requiring a particular set of skills each and every time, tools and techniques. And so why does recognizing the uniqueness of each project matter? Well, it matters because adapting the approach and selecting the most appropriate methods and tools and techniques ensures that the project successfully delivers those desired outcomes, i.e., delivers value. And I did reference the Goldilocks principle, the idea of not too little, not too much project management, but finding the right amount of project management, just enough, no more, no less, for what the situation requires. So tailoring provides a few benefits. One is there's a deeper commitment from the project team. When we do not inundate a project with, things that don't matter or not required, we're not doing things simply for the sake of doing them, but that we've consciously thought about whether each and every approach, each and every skill that's required, each and every tool has been carefully considered, and that it aligns nicely with the project. It means that we don't have any inefficiencies or potentially, or we're not, burdening a project with too much administrative oversight. We reduce waste and duplication of processes. We remove non-value add activities. We have a better, more focused approach to the customer, and we make better use of our project resources, which are limited. Principle number 8, quality. The idea and the requirement to build quality into the processes and deliverables of the project. Quality can be defined in many ways. One idea of quality is the satisfaction of stakeholder expectations. Another is to fulfill the project and product requirements, to meet the acceptance criteria for a particular deliverable, and to ensure project processes are appropriate and effective. So when we think about quality with respect to a project, we can look at it from many different angles. We can look at it from a performance point of view, i.e., does the tool or the process function as it is intended to? We can look at it from the idea of conformity. Is it fit for use and does it meet specifications? Reliability. Does it meet consistent metrics every time and produce the right outcomes? Resilience. Can the system itself, the process, the product, can it cope with failure and can we recover quickly? Satisfaction. Does it elicit positive feedback? Uniformity. Does it show parity with other deliverables? Efficiency. Does it produce the greatest output with the least amount of effort? And sustainability. Does it produce a positive impact on economic, social, and environmental factors? A focus on quality will ensure that the deliverables are fit for purpose, the deliverables of the project meet stakeholder expectations, that we reduce defects, we ensure timely and expedited delivery, we enhance cost control, reduce cost, reduce the dissatisfaction of our customers and reduce the number of complaints. We can improve team morale, improve our decision making, and deliver continuous improvement in project management processes and practices. Principle number 9, complexity. Navigating complexity within the project. Projects are complex undertakings. If you think about all of the influences on a particular project, from our ability to select the right project, to define the scope of the project and plan accordingly, to the execution and navigating ambiguity within the organization and the politics that come within organizations, the idea that all these systems are interacting with each other, the idea that projects are a team sport, and therefore, when we're working with individuals, certain individuals have different passions, they have different ideals, they operate differently. What's important to one is not as important to another. They have a different focus, right? There are drivers that are different for some than they are for others. And the fact that there's this uncertainty, we're undertaking something that, although may be similar in nature to something else that we've done, we've seen that the environment and many other things do change and affect a particular project, and bring about a different type of approach, a different sort of way of looking at things, and dealing with different things within the project. The fact that there might be a different time of year, a different environment, a different customer. So all of these things, influence a project, and it makes them so complex. To look at sources of complexity in a little bit more deep detail, consider human behavior, how people conduct themselves, the behavior, the attitude, person's experience, and whether they see things objectively or subjectively, the conflict that arises between people working together and having different ideas and different approaches and different attitudes, people's personal agendas, where they work, any language barriers, cultural norms, all of those things lead to complexities that a project manager and a team have to contend with. Then you have system behaviors, the integration of different technology systems. And when we're implementing a new application or a new system, it's unlikely to be the one and only within the current ecosystem. And so we have to think about how that particular new application, that new system, connects with all of our other systems, and things like data is consistent and flows appropriately, right? That there is that synergy between those two systems, that they're compatible. It comes from uncertainty and ambiguity. There are many options in terms of the way that we can approach a particular project. Often, in the initial stages or phases of a project, there is lack of clarity. There might even be unclear, sort of misleading events. And there's a lack of understanding of the issues and the events, something called the unknown unknowns, black swan events. And there's technological innovations. Technology innovations can change the way a project work is performed. Think about how AI is potentially disrupting, and it could be in a good way, or it also could add other complexities to how project teams manage information, and how work might be executed. So innovation can complement, enhance, or sometimes even disrupt project work. And with uncertainty comes risk. Risk is a byproduct of uncertainty. And so principle number 10 is the notion of recognizing uncertainty and risk as being present, and to optimize our risk responses. Meaning, for every risk that we identify, the idea is to be proactive. And if we can identify a risk, then we can implement strategies ahead of that risk becoming an issue. Definition of a risk is that an event in the future that may or may not occur. We can look into the future and potentially identify events that could conspire against our ability to deliver successfully. If we can identify those events, we can then come up with strategies or plans on how, if the risk does become an issue, i.e., the risk is triggered, it's no longer a potential event, we already have plans in place to deal with it effectively. So we're not being reactive, but we're being proactive. So projects are characterized by uncertainty and ambiguity, and as a result, they're subject to risk. Risk exposure must be continuously evaluated. As I mentioned in class, risk is often at its highest in the early stages or phases of a project and its life cycle. But as the project moves through its life cycle, more information is gathered, the project is better understood, some of the risks will be in the past because the project moves forward and those risks were tied to a certain part of the project. And if we're able to get past that, that risk may no longer be relevant. But there is always risk. And one of the things that we should be really cautious about is that risk may diminish as a project moves through its life cycle, but it never gets to zero. I've been on projects where something has gone wrong at the last moment. And maybe we could have identified, the trigger itself of that risk event and being able to plan proactively. But sometimes, things are not easily understood and seen that far out in advance. Or, we may have identified certain things that may happen, and luckily we're able to put plans in place. If this happens, then let's do this. And many times on a project, that proactive thinking has actually allowed us to overcome those negative events. We often talk about risk, and again, we're going to look at risk in a little bit more detail down the road. But we talk about it, and I myself am a little bit also uh, biased when it comes to this, and I see risk as a negative thing. But risk can be a positive opportunity, and if we can exploit risk in a way that allows us to deliver quicker at a lower cost, then we also have to look at that and look at it from that point of view as well. Something to take note of and to consider. And again, it's this notion that the environment and the culture of a particular organization can affect risk and risk management. So every organization has its own unique risk, and that comes from the attitude. How do they see risk? Are they risk taking or risk averse as an organization? If you work in an organization that is risk taking, then some of the implications of that will be is that there might be less governance. Maybe you don't need as many reviews and sign-offs, or there isn't the need to get multiple reviews and people involved in a decision. But if there's risk aversion, it means individuals might be reluctant to say what they think. Risk aversion can also show up in things like our ability to determine an estimate for how long something will take. If individuals are working within a risk aversion type of environment or risk averse, then they'll tend to embellish or you know come up with estimates that are larger than what the work may actually take or cost. So for example, somebody might look at a piece of work in front of them and they're asked to estimate how long it will take. And in a risk averse environment, they may be cautious and say 20 hours or 30 hours is just an example, where maybe that work often takes less than 5. But they're so worried that the incorrect estimate leads to a schedule that is not feasible, and then that type of decision will come back on them, and so they play things a little bit more cautiously. There's also appetite. How much risk are we willing to absorb? And threshold, sort of the measure of acceptable variations around an objective that reflects the risk appetite. So how risk is identified, assessed, managed, and addressed is influenced by these characteristics. Principle number 11, adaptability and resilience. Embrace adaptability and resiliency. Projects are dynamic. It is absolutely difficult to be able to completely, especially early on in those early stages or phases of a project, to be able to understand all of the elements of the project. It's very difficult for us to be able to look into the future and see everything that can go wrong and how we need to basically manage that proactively. So recognizing that projects are dynamic and recognizing that many things can be outside of our control, at least in the early phases of a project, then taking the approach where we design for adaptability and resiliency allows us to navigate change, because change is something that is part of project delivery. Change is inevitable. If there's one idea that I can leave you with, is that change will occur. And we have to be able to adapt to that change and have, the skill of resiliency to be able to navigate, to get over that hurdle, to get over that particular, you know, um, obstacle in our path. In many cultures and across different regions and religions, there's this notion of the fallibility of man. That man believes that he or she can plan and you know um, be confident in our plans, while God laughs because we just don't see all of the variables, and we have this false notion that we control a lot of things. Projects rarely perform as initially planned. Another idea that I want to leave you with: you can have a fairly well developed plan, and early on or somewhere down the road, that plan is no longer feasible for whatever reason. We can't just abandon the project. We have to be able to either get the project back on track or to adjust the plan. New requirements or issues, the stakeholder influence can affect how we plan. That requires changes to our approach. And some elements of the project just fall short of expectations, and we need to regroup and rethink and replan and redo. So before you become complacent, and I hopefully you'll see some of this in play with your own particular projects for this semester, is that you will develop, and I'm confident that you will develop fairly good plans on how you're going to approach your video presentation. But along the way, the things that you thought to be true will prove to be false. And you have to adjust. And it may be difficult because often we want things to go the way that we've planned. And we're busy in our and with school and our own personal lives and work. But these are just things that we're going to have to be able to deal with and adjust, even though it might be difficult. So some ideas of how projects can deal with adaptability and resilience. So, for example, short feedback loops for quicker change. We will see the whole idea of agile approaches is to be able to get immediate feedback from our customers, our stakeholders, our business partners, because they are physically in the same location, or there's mechanisms to allow quick and immediate feedback to be able to continuously learn and adjust, to have project teams that are built around people with broad sets of skills and experience, and not just necessarily individuals that have a singular skill. In fact, if you look at it from a project management point of view, this idea of generalists is taking shape rather than subject matter experts, because generalists do have a wider range of skills that they can utilize for when and if things change, to build diversity into project teams. So different ideas of thinking, different points of view, different levels of expertise. Ensure that planning is transparent and that we engage as many stakeholders in the broader stakeholder community. Again, this idea of agility, where we build often, we test, we try approaches, and we fail quickly and adapt and adjust. To have open and honest conversations, and that comes with individuals within the team feeling safe to be able to express those opinions, and the ability to learn from our past mistakes, to look objectively at where things have gone wrong, to understand the root cause, to accept whatever recommendations and changes are put forward, so that we learn from these past mistakes and we minimize them going forward. And the last project management principle, change. Enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. So again, projects deliver change in an organization. There is a current state, how things are done today, or the product suite that we may have today, and the way processes and tools are working and implemented. That's how things are today. And a project is undertaken to change an aspect of that, to deliver some sort of future state that requires adoption of new practices or new tools or the sustainment of different behaviors. And so project success, and again, going back to kind of systems thinking or value, at the end of the day, it's not good enough just to deliver that new process or that new application or that new way of doing things. It's not good enough to be able to say, I delivered my part, the physical part or the change part. Individuals have to be prepared to be able to adopt and utilize that change effectively. Otherwise, the future state is not achieved. And so, although we don't talk about the concept of change management significantly within this course, the idea that you are changing something that people are used to today and how they work and the tools that they interact with, the idea that you're bringing about change then requires an effective approach to managing the change. And so it can't be haphazard. It can't happen by accident. We have to think about how things are changing early on in the project, really from the onset of the project, and come up with an approach, a strategy as to how those changes are going to be communicated, how individuals are going to be trained, how we are going to ensure that those changes are being adopted, and how to make changes and pivots if the adoption isn't going according to plan. And so you have to think about change in many different aspects. But one of the things is that change is hard. People are people, and human behavior is such that individuals do not embrace change. One of the questions that I asked early on around skills is how every one of you is, adaptive of change, and how well you welcome change. And if I remember correctly, the results were fairly high. Most of you said, "Oh yeah, I can change. Or, I welcome change." But the facts don't necessarily support that outcome. People are resistant. We tend to hold on to the things that we are familiar with. And so projects have to contend with the fact that not everyone is going to, first and foremost, be aware of the change, accept the change, be comfortable with the change, adopt the change. There are going to be pockets of individuals that are going to be resistant to that change. And if we deliver too much change, i.e., if we don't think about sort of what we're doing and we make the future state so much different than the current state, it can be overwhelming for individuals. And if we're changing, i.e., delivering project after project after project, people get tired of the change. There's such a thing called sort of, fatigue to change and resistance. And so people push back even further. And so the best way, and this is a simplified statement, but the best way project teams and project managers should think is that the best way to accomplish scope is to engage with stakeholders, even those that are negative, to be able to build that sort of vision and solidarity and acceptance of the project, to get their buy-in and support.